Hey, my name is Daniel. I'm 31. Until a few months ago, I was just the quiet guy on the street. Freelance work, small house, nobody's first call for anything. Then one stormy night, my neighbor knocked on my door soaked to the bone, shaking, and whispered, "I have nowhere else to go." She was 44, married, the kind of woman who made the whole neighborhood feel underdressed just by checking her mail. I let her in, made her tea. And somewhere between that night and all the quiet nights that came after it, something happened between us that neither of us ever said out loud and neither of us ever stopped. She told me once, sitting on my porch in the dark, "I feel like myself when I'm here." That was the most dangerous thing she ever said to me. If you're watching this right now, tell me where you're from in the comments, because I still don't know if what we did was wrong. I never thought of myself as the kind of man women like her noticed. I was 31, freelance graphic designer. Lived alone in a small 2-bedroom house on Clearwater Lane. The kind of street where every other house had a 3-car garage and a lawn service that came twice a week. My place had one cracked gutter I kept meaning to fix, and a porch light that buzzed when it rained. I didn't belong there, honestly. I'd rented it because it was cheap relative to the neighborhood, and I needed the quiet for work. I learned quickly that in a place like that, people notice things. What time you leave, what time you come back, whether your grass is half an inch too tall. I noticed things too, mostly her. Elena Whitmore lived next door in a house that looked like it belonged on a magazine cover. White columns, black shutters, a garden that bloomed in colors I didn't know the names of. Her husband Richard drove a silver car that probably cost more than 3 years of my rent. He left early, he came back late, sometimes didn't come back for days. I'd seen Elena in passing. We'd waved, said polite things about the weather. She was the kind of woman who looked composed, even checking her mail. Dark hair pulled back, silk blouse, posture like someone had taught her how to stand when she was young and she'd never forgotten. She was I knew because Claire Jensen from across the street had mentioned it once, and that way neighbors share information like a gift and a warning at the same time. I had never spoken to Elena for more than 3 minutes. Until the storm? It started as rain and turned into something angry by 9 o'clock, the kind that makes windows rattle in their frames. I was at my kitchen table finishing a logo project, empty coffee mug beside me, blue screen light making the room feel smaller than it was. I looked out the window at some point. The neighborhood was dark. The Whitmore house next door sat completely black, no porch light, no warm windows, nothing. Strange Elena was always home when Richard traveled. Then I heard the knock. Not loud, not urgent, just 3 quiet taps. The kind a person makes when they're not sure they should be knocking at all. I opened the door. She was soaked, her dark hair flat against her face, white blouse made nearly translucent by the rain. She was holding her own arms like she was trying to hold herself together. Mascara running in 2 thin lines down her cheeks, and she didn't seem to know or care. She looked at me for a moment without speaking, then quietly, "I have nowhere else to go." I stepped aside and let her in. She stood in my kitchen looking out of place in the most human way I'd ever seen. Like a painting hung in the wrong room, still beautiful, just surrounded by the wrong things. My dishes on the rack, a grocery list stuck to the fridge, my old running shoes by the back door. I handed her a towel, found a dry gray sweater from the laundry basket and set it on the counter without making a thing of it. She came back from the bathroom wearing it, arms wrapped around herself, but warmer now. I put the kettle on. We didn't speak while it boiled. She sat at the table. I stood near the counter. We just listened to the rain. It was a strange silence, not uncomfortable, just careful. Like both of us understood there was no rush. I set a mug in front of her. She wrapped both hands around it. "Richard's traveling," she said. "Been gone since Tuesday." A pause. I just didn't want to be in that house tonight. I didn't push her. I sat across from her and let the storm be loud enough for both of us. She looked different without the composure. Still beautiful, maybe more so. Something underneath the polish I'd never been close enough to see before. Something tired. Something that had been carrying weight for a long time. At some point she looked up and said, almost too quietly, "Would it be all right if I stayed here tonight? Just until morning?" "Yeah," I said, "of course." I made up the couch with spare blankets. She stood in the doorway watching, still holding her mug. "Is it temporary?" she said. "Not cold, just clear." "I know." "Richard wouldn't understand," she added. Then, "He doesn't understand most things about me lately." That was when we heard footsteps outside. Mr. Alvarez from 3 doors down, shuffling under an umbrella with his terrier. Elena went still beside me at the window. "My car," she said. It was parked in plain sight at the curb, cream-colored, expensive, unmistakably hers. "I can move it into my driveway," I said. "It'll just look like you had it serviced." I went out through the side door into the rain. The night smelled like wet asphalt and cut grass. I moved her car quietly, came back dripping, and she handed me the towel I'd given her earlier. We stood in the kitchen, looking at each other, and in that moment, something between us quietly rearranged itself. Like furniture moved in the dark. You couldn't see what changed. You just knew the room was different. Good night, Daniel, she said. Good night. I went to bed but didn't sleep. I lay in the dark thinking about her face at my door. I have nowhere else to go. Not like a woman in crisis. More like a woman who'd been standing at her own door for years and had finally walked through it. Around midnight, the storm had softened to quiet rain. I got up for water and pushed open the kitchen door. She was already there, sitting at the table in my sweater, looking out the window at the dark backyard. Couldn't sleep, she said, without turning. Me neither. We sat across from each other and didn't make a production of it. Just two people awake in a quiet house with nowhere better to be. I haven't slept a full night in about 3 years, she said eventually. Since when exactly? Since I stopped lying to myself about how things were. She turned her mug slowly. Richard and I are polite to each other? That's probably the most honest way to say it. Very polite. The word sat there between us like something slightly broken. I told her about Maya then. 3 years together. And at the end I realized we hadn't really talked. Not like this. Not at midnight in a quiet kitchen in probably a year and a half. We'd been polite too. Alina listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "That's a specific kind of loneliness. When you're lonely but you're not alone." Yeah, I said. That's exactly what it is. We looked at each other a second too long, then both looked away, deliberately. At the same time, the rain was just a whisper now. Eventually we went to our separate rooms, but lying in the dark again, I noticed my chest felt lighter. The way it feels when you put something down that you've carried so long you forgot you were carrying it. She was up before me, and I came downstairs to find her at my stove, the smell of coffee already filling the kitchen. Morning light coming in low and golden through the window. She turned when she heard me and looked like a third version of herself I hadn't met yet. Not composed like at the mailbox, not shaken like at the door, just quiet. We sat across from each other with coffee and it felt nothing like what I'd expected. No awkward explanations, no hurry to reset. She told me something I hadn't known. Months earlier, at one of Claire Jensen's neighborhood gatherings, someone had been making comments about Richard, some business thing. Apparently I'd said something offhand. That people's business lives aren't always what they look like from outside. You were the only one who said anything, Alina told me. That's why I knocked on your door last night and not anyone else's. I didn't know what to say. One careless sentence at a bad wine party had become the thing that made me trustworthy in her mind. It made me think about how few acts of kindness people actually hold on to, and how much weight they carry for the people who need them. She left shortly after, drove back next door without looking back. And the house beside mine was just a house, again. That evening Claire Jensen caught me at my mailbox. "Thought I saw Alina Whitmore leaving your place this morning," she said with that particular smile. "She needed to use the printer," I said. She studied me, then smiled and kept walking. Later, well after dark, my phone lit up. "Thank you again for last night." I stared at it, then typed "any time." An hour after that, another knock. She was calmer this time. Hair down, light cardigan. She came in and we sat at the table with coffee and the conversation was smaller, more ordinary. She laughed at something I said about a client. A real laugh. Before she left, she paused in the doorway, hand on the frame. Her mouth opened. Then she pressed her lips together and looked at me with something in her eyes I couldn't quite name. Not sadness, more like recognition. Like she'd found a word in a language she'd forgotten. She knew. She said goodnight, and walked back into the dark. Richard came home the next morning, Silverka unhurried, moving like a man who expected the world to adjust around him. He shook my hand at the mailbox, too firm, too brief, and went inside without looking back. He was taller than me, more groomed, older. He had that settled authority that wealthy men get after years of comfort, nothing to do with warmth. I understood something about Elena's loneliness in that moment that I hadn't fully understood before. That night, I noticed the porch light on the Whitmore house flickering, on, off, like someone pacing past a switch without caring. I watched it for a long time before I went to bed. A few days later, Alina appeared at my door with a small plate of pastries wrapped in wax paper, tied with twine. "They're not as good as they look," she said. "I'm not actually much of a baker." "Thank you, Daniel. They're good." "Alina," she laughed. Small, surprised, real. And from across the street, behind a window, I noticed a second too late. Claire Jensen stood watching. That evening, Alina brought wine. She came in the way you come in when a place has started to feel like somewhere you've been before. We settled on the porch without deciding to, and the sky went from orange to purple to dark while we talked. She told me about the early years with Richard, how she'd believed in him when they were young, how she'd confused his focus for love. How it had taken years to understand that for Richard, everything including her was an asset to be managed rather than a person to be known. I don't say that with bitterness. I think it's just how he's built. Does that make it easier? No, it just makes it less personal. At some point, she said quietly, "I feel like myself when I'm here." I looked at her. "That probably sounds ridiculous," she added. "It doesn't," I said. She pressed her lips together and looked out at the street. and I noticed for the first time the particular way she held herself when she said something true, a slight stillness. Like she was surprised at her own honesty and didn't want to break it with motion. Claire Jensen hosted a neighborhood gathering that weekend. Citronella candles, store-bought appetizers, conversations that circled politely around the things people actually wanted to say. Elena came with Richard. He stood close to her all evening. Not affectionate, just positional. Like a man who considers proximity a form of ownership. He shook my hand too firmly and said, "Good to see you," in a tone that meant nothing. Elena and I barely spoke directly. We were careful. But I felt her in the room the whole time. The way you feel a draft. Not always visible, but constant. Once, near the drink table, away from the crowd, she pressed the glass into my hand, and her fingers wrapped briefly around mine before releasing. She didn't look at me when she did it. She walked back to Richard's side. I stood there thinking, this is the most dangerous kind of moment. The kind nobody else sees. The kind that only matters to you. Later that night she came to my door, changed out of her dress, looking quietly shaken. The kind that comes after a long argument that started to reasonably to walk away from. "We had words," she said. I let her in. She sat on the couch and told me about it. Richard's control. The way he talked to her in front of people, gracious on the surface, corrective underneath. The feeling of being edited in real time. He doesn't raise his voice. He's never cruel. He's just revising me, constantly. "You always listen," she said, looking at me. "You never tell me what I should do. It's not my place. That's why I keep coming here." The clock on my bookshelf ticked. She had her feet tucked under her on my couch in that old gray sweater, and she looked, at that exact moment, less like the woman next door and more like something I couldn't afford to think about too clearly. At some point the space between us felt too small and too large at the same time. She leaned forward slightly. I leaned forward slightly. And then we both stopped. Sat back. Breathed. "I should go," she said softly. "Probably," I said. But neither of us moved for another full minute. The days after that settled into something that had no name. She didn't come over every night. Maybe 3 times a week. Sometimes less. There was no schedule to it. No agreement. Just a knock at some point after dark, and the particular sound of her footsteps on the porch boards that I started to recognize without meaning to. I told myself it was just company. 2 lonely people in a quiet neighborhood filling in the silence for each other. And I believed that for a while. The truth was simpler and more complicated at the same time. I looked forward to those knocks more than I looked forward to almost anything else in my life. One evening she came over and mentioned that Richard had been making comments about her time, where she went, who she talked to. Nothing accusatory, she said, just observational. The way he made everything feel like data being collected. He asked if I'd made any new friends lately. She said, "What did you say?" I said no. A pause. He seemed satisfied with that. She looked at her hands. I looked at mine. "Does it bother you?" I asked, saying that. She thought about it honestly. It used to. Now I think I've just gotten very good at living in the small spaces he doesn't look at. There was something in that sentence that stayed with me long after she left. The small spaces he doesn't look at. I had become one of those spaces. I wasn't sure how I felt about that. I wasn't sure I had the right to feel anything about it at all. One night, she arrived a little later than usual. I had already turned off most of the lights and was reading in the chair by the lamp when I heard her. She looked tired, not the surface kind, the deep kind that lives behind the eyes. We didn't talk much that night. She sat on the couch and I sat in the chair and I read and she just rested. That was the only word for it. Like she'd come over not for conversation but just to be somewhere that didn't require anything from her. At some point I looked up and she had her eyes closed, head tilted back slightly against the cushion. I turned the lamp down a little. An hour passed like that. Just the 2 of us in the quiet room. The street outside going dark and still, the refrigerator humming in the kitchen. Eventually she stirred and opened her eyes and looked at me with an expression I didn't know how to read. Not embarrassed. Something softer than that. "I fell asleep," she said. "I know. I'm sorry. Don't be." She sat up slowly, pushed her hair back, looked around the room like she was remembering where she was. "When did that start?" she said quietly, almost to herself. Being able to sleep somewhere. She left about 20 minutes later. Walked across the dark lawn in the same unhurried way she did everything. And I stood at the window watching until the Whitmore house door closed behind her, and then I stood there a little while longer, at nothing at all. The phone call came on a Thursday night. We were sitting on the porch. The night was warm, and the neighborhood was the kind of quiet that only happens midweek. No gatherings. No lawn equipment, just the occasional car rolling through, and the sound of someone's wind chimes 3 houses down. My phone was on the little table between us. It lit up and rang and I reached for it, and when I saw the name I felt something tighten in my chest. Richard Whitmore. I looked at Elena. Her eyes dropped to the screen and she went absolutely still. I answered Daniel. His voice was even controlled. the voice of a man who had never needed to raise it to get what he wanted. Have you seen Elena this evening? She mentioned she might take a walk and I haven't heard from her. The pause lasted about 1 second. 1 second where I was aware of Elena sitting 2 feet from me, not breathing, eyes fixed on the dockyard. Haven't seen her, I said. Not tonight. All right. If you do, tell her I'm looking for her. Sure. He hung up. The wind chimes down the street rang softly. Elena stood up very quickly and gathered her cardigan from the back of the chair, and she didn't look at me directly when she said, I have to go. I know. Daniel, go. It's okay. She crossed the porch, went down the steps, and moved quickly across the lawn. I watched her disappear through the side door of her house. A light came on in an upstairs window almost immediately. I sat there alone on the porch for a long time. The wind chimes again. The refrigerator hummed from inside. A car somewhere far away. I picked up my phone and set it face down on the table. After that, silence. 3 days. Then 5. Then a full week. She didn't knock. She didn't text. When I saw her outside, she was always moving with purpose. To the car, back from the car, into the garden with her head down, and if she noticed me, she would give a small nod that meant nothing and meant everything. I didn't go to her. It wasn't my place to go to her. I understood that. But the evenings got very quiet in a different way than they'd been quiet before. She started coming over. Before, the quiet had just been neutral. Empty space. Now it had a shape. It had the shape of a chair on the porch that nobody was sitting in. The shape of a coffee mug on the counter that I kept picking up before I remembered. I hadn't made 2 cups. Claire Jensen stopped me outside one afternoon. Haven't seen you and Elena chatting lately? She said in that careful, innocent tone. People get busy, I said. She smiled, nodded, moved on. I went inside and stood in the kitchen for a while, doing nothing. I found the scarf on a Tuesday. I was straightening the couch, something I didn't do often enough, and there it was, slipped between the cushion and the armrest. Silk, dark green. It smelled faintly of whatever she wore, something subtle and warm that I couldn't name. I stood there holding it. There were 2 obvious things to do. Knock on her door and return it, or leave it on the porch with a note. Both options felt too loaded, too much like an opening or a closing, and I wasn't sure which one I was ready for. I folded it carefully, put it in the top drawer of my dresser. I told myself I'd figure out the right moment. What I didn't tell myself, what I was aware of without saying, was that I kept it because I wasn't ready to give away the last tangible proof that any of it had actually happened, that she'd been here, in this room, in my old sweater with her feet tucked under her, real and tired and more herself than she was anywhere else. The drawer stayed closed. But I thought about it more than I should have. Weeks went by. I got back to work properly, took on 2 new clients, fixed a cracked gutter, started running in the mornings again, something I'd let fall away. Life resumed its shape. Richard's car came and went. Elena moved through her days, on her side of the fence, graceful, composed, sealed up. Sometimes I'd catch her looking in my direction from across the yard, a glance that lasted a half second and then disappeared, and I'd wonder if I'd imagined it. Mr. Alvarez stopped me one afternoon while I was checking the mail. "You're all right?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. "Fine." "Why?" He shrugged in that slow way of his. He looked like a man waiting for something. I didn't answer that. He nodded like I had. "People talk, you know? In this neighborhood, Mrs. Jensen mentioned something at the Garcias last weekend. I know people talk. Is making sure you know that Richard Whitmore is not a man who lets things go unexamined." He said it gently, without judgment, the way an older man warns a younger one about a fire, without accusing him of wanting to burn anything down. "I appreciate it," I said. He patted my shoulder once and shuffled back toward his house. That evening I stood at my window for a while watching the Whitmore house. The lights moved from room to room upstairs in that slow pattern that had started to feel familiar. Living room, then the bedroom, then dark. The routine of a house where 2 people lived separately inside the same walls. Then I went to my desk and tried to work. At 2:07 in the morning my phone lit up. I had been half asleep in the chair, laptop still open, the screen gone dark from inactivity. The buzz of the phone pulled me up from somewhere shallow. I looked at it. 1 message. "Did you keep my scarf?" I sat there in the dark for a moment. The house was completely still. Somewhere outside a single car moved through the neighborhood and was gone. I typed back, "Yes." I set the phone down. 2 minutes passed. Maybe 3. Then I heard footsteps on the porch. She was standing outside my door in a dark coat, hair loose, hands in her pockets. She looked like someone who'd made a decision and was going to see it through before she could talk herself out of it. I couldn't sleep. She said, "Come in." She came inside and we settled into the familiar places. Her on the couch, me in the chair, and for a while neither of us said much. The house was quiet in the way it only gets very late at night, that particular stillness that makes everything feel slightly more honest than it does in daylight. "I tried," she said eventually. "Tried what? To fix it?" She looked at her hands. "With Richard." I thought maybe if I made more of an effort, engaged more with his world, went to the dinners, asked the right questions, did it help? She was quiet for a moment. He appreciated it. Told me I'd been more present lately. A pause. He said it like I was an employee who'd improved their performance review. I didn't say anything. I realized. She said slowly that even my best effort in that marriage feels like nothing compared to just sitting on your porch. The clock ticked. Something settled in the room. Alina, I know, she said quickly. I know what I'm saying. I'm not asking for anything. Daniel, I'm not here to blow up my life or yours. I just needed to say it to someone who would understand it. I understand it, I said. She nodded, looked at the floor. I know you do. That's the whole problem, isn't it? We talked for a long time after that. We talked about boundaries, not the way people talk about them when they're building walls, but the way you talk about them when you're trying to be honest about a fire that's already burning and figure out how close you can stand without getting hurt. She said she would not leave Richard. Not because she loved him the way she once had, but because their lives were too interwoven. The house, the history, the version of herself she'd built alongside him for 20 years. I'm not brave enough, she said. And then, or maybe I'm too old for brave. You're 44, I said. That's old enough to know what you're losing. It's also old enough to know what you're keeping. She looked at me with that expression she sometimes had. Like I'd said something that landed in a place she hadn't expected. I never wanted to be the person who did this, she said quietly. Came to someone else's house in the dark. You haven't done anything? I said. I've wanted to. The room sat with that for a moment. So have I said. She closed her eyes briefly, opened them. That doesn't make it easier. No, I said. It doesn't. Later, much later, we were still on the porch. The neighborhood was completely dark by then. No cars, no wind chimes, just the sky and the streetlight at the end of the block casting a long pale rectangle across the quiet road. She was sitting close, not touching, but close, in the way that means something. At some point she turned toward me, and I turned toward her, and we stayed like that for a long moment, just looking, just being looked at. In the particular way that two people look at each other when they've stopped pretending they don't see each other. She leaned forward very slowly and pressed her forehead against mine. That was all. No kiss. Just that. Her forehead against mine, and her eyes closed, and both of us breathing in the same small space of air. It lasted maybe 30 seconds. It lasted longer than most things I can remember. Then she sat back, put her hand briefly on my arm, stood up. I should go before the street wakes up, she said. Yea, she picked up her cardigan from the chair back, stood at the top of the porch steps, looking out at the dark lawn. Daniel, yea, thank you. For all of it. For being a place where I could just be. I looked at her. You don't have to thank me for that. She smiled. Small, real, the kind that doesn't ask for anything back. Then she walked down the steps and across the lawn, and the dark folded around her and she was gone. I stood on the porch for a long time after she went in. The night was just the night again. Quiet street, distant lamp. The faint sound of something leaves, maybe, or a very distant radio carried in on the air and then gone. I thought about what she'd said. A place where I could just be. I turned it over in my mind the way you turn a smooth stone. Something you keep, not because it's useful, but because the weight of it feels right in your hand. Life resumed after that, the way life does. I took my morning runs, finished my projects, fixed things around the house, waved at Mr. Alvarez, nodded politely at Claire Jensen when she tried to start conversations that were really questions, wearing other clothes. Richard's schedule continued its patterns. Early departures, late returns, occasional absences of a few days. Alina moved through her life on her side of the fence, composed, careful, sealed, but sometimes she walked past my house more slowly than she needed to. And sometimes when I was sitting on the porch in the evening, I would look up and see her at her window. Not quite watching, not quite not watching. We didn't talk about what had happened on the porch that last night. We didn't need to. Some things between people live better in silence than they would in words. She texted occasionally. Small things. A photo of something funny she'd seen. A question about a restaurant she thought I might know. The kind of messages that exist in the spaces between everything that can't be said. I always wrote back. One night a few weeks after everything, she sent a message that just said, I finally slept a full night. First time in years. I read it twice. Then typed, good. She sent back a single period, which sounds like nothing. But I understood it the way you understand the last note of a song when the room goes quiet, not as an ending. Exactly. More like a breath. Some mornings I come out to check the mail and the Whitmore house sits exactly as it always has. White columns, black shutters, that garden in colors I still don't know the names of. Some evenings I sit on the porch with a coffee and the neighborhood does what it does. Mr. Alvarez and his terrier, Claire Jensen with her observations dressed up as questions, the distant sound of someone else's life carrying over the fence line, and some nights when Slate in the street is quiet and I'm sitting in the lamplit living room with a book I'm not really reading, I hear the soft sound of footsteps on the porch boards, and my chest does that thing it does, that particular kind of lifting. I don't move right away. I just sit there for a second, book in hand, and let the feeling be what it is, something that has no good name, something that arrived in a rainstorm and never fully left. Then I get up, and I open the door, and she's there, and neither of us says anything for a moment, because we don't have to. I leave my porch light on every night now, just in case she ever needs somewhere to go. If this story found you at the wrong hour of the night, you're not alone. Like and follow A News Story posts every week.